Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Isabel and I'm the Education Community Manager here at ACCA. Today I am delighted to have Jeremy Leigh with us, who is a fellow ACCA team member, but also someone who has successfully completed the journey to ACCA membership. We're here to discuss a topic that might initially seem unrelated to the experience of being an ACCA student, and that's training for the London Marathon. However, while preparing for the marathon, Jeremy discovered many similarities between that challenge and achieving the ACCA qualification. So today we're going to explore the two experiences and how they overlap, from the importance of discipline and planning to the great sense of accomplishment that comes from reaching key milestones and finally crossing that finish line. So I'm really excited to learn more, so I think we should get stuck in. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course, read it.
So before we talk about the marathon, maybe you could give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, maybe a bit about your ACCA journey and career.
Absolutely. So I started my career at a medium practice firm in London, and that's what I qualified with ACCA. And then following that, really, I mean, I'm quite a good example, I think, the sort of the flexibility of what the ACCA qualification brings you, because following that, I didn't really see myself sort of in practice and becoming a partner. So I moved from there to a hedge fund, so working in the corporate sector, looking after a portfolio of overseas companies. And then from there, I've moved to ACCA, so the not-for-profit sector. So as you see, I've sort of moved across sectors, quite flexible using the ACCA qualification. And I've been at ACCA for just over 10 years now, and I work with our employer team. So I oversee our sort of global employer proposition package.
Really, I think that's a really, really good example, like you say, of the flexibility that the qualification can provide. So that's one benefit of doing ACCA, but I wondered why you chose it to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, I didn't really sort of see myself becoming a partner. And really ACCA, the reason I chose it was just to keep my options open, really, because I just saw the flexibility of it. I saw, in terms of the global nature. And obviously I thought, this is the way the world is going. It's not getting a bigger place, it's getting a smaller place. So to have a recognised global qualification, I thought was very beneficial. And so really, yeah, that was sort of the reason that I did it, the flexibility, and obviously as well the option papers that ACCA has. And I quite like the fact, that I could tailor the qualification in terms of the direction that I wanted to go. So yeah, that was really, I suppose, what made my decision to do ACCA.
Great. Well, that's a really good overview, but now we'll get into the main topic, which is the London Marathon. So before we discuss how that overlaps with your experience of being an ACCA student, can you tell us when you participated, how it went, how did you find it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I completed it in 2017, but that definitely wasn't the beginning of my marathon story. I'd always watched it on TV, this sort of London Marathon, iconic, going past the Cutty Sark and across Tower Bridge, etc. And it was just something I always sort of said, I'm going to do this. And it got to the stage, I think, where a friend of mine said, right, you've been talking about doing this for about 15 years, either do it or stop talking about it. So yeah, and it just really all fell into place. It was, I wanted to do it before my 40th birthday, and without giving my age away, April 2017, I was 39 years and 11 months. But also I wanted to do it for a cause close to me, and a close personal friend unfortunately had lost a baby at 6 days old, and this was the 10th anniversary in 2017. So it was just sort of all felt right. This is right. And as I said, it was a time to either do it or stop talking about doing it. And I suppose the other thing to say is I was not a runner. So I don't come from a background. I'd probably never been inside a gym even. And so, yeah, just sort of started preparing about sort of December, January, and ran it in April.
Well, I can definitely sympathise. I started running in lockdown, went from couch to 5K, as they say, and now I'm quite addicted. So I'm interested to know that link between the training for the marathon and your ACCA studies. So what kind of similarities did you start to notice?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is, I didn't sort of set out thinking, oh, there's, going to be similarities, but it was just the more and more that I was training, the more and more it sort of brought me back to all these similar sort of resources and tools I'd used when revising. Another thing says I do have ADHD. I didn't know at the time. Maybe that's another podcast for another day. So I think a lot of sort of my mindset is sort of very black and white, and that sort of is how I go into revising for my exams and also for the marathon. So yeah, there were just a sort of a lot of crossovers. I suppose the big thing, the main mantra in terms of both the revising for the marathon and the exams was, I was sort of thinking, right, the only thing that's not in my control are the questions. Okay, that's the only thing I can't control on the day. Everything outside of that, the whole environment outside, is in my control. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was ready for everything else, really. So that was sort of, I suppose, as I say, the main overarching thought. One thing that in terms of the exams and also the marathon, I always have to feel like I'm doing a challenge, certainly exercise-wise, that's sort of almost beyond me, so that I'm sort of almost scared. I have to train, I have to revise because this is tough. So I think that's really good to sort of feel that you're being pushed. I did once ask one of the CEOs we had at an ACCA event, when you go into a promotion, when you go into your next job, are you always worried? Is it always is it a push for you? And they said yes. Unless it's a push, you shouldn't really be going for it. So this was sort of my thought that in terms of that, and it was a good thing. But yeah, as I say, there was lots of things that similarities. I think probably the main one is having a plan. So I always thought with the sort of challenges I do, marathon, if I download a tried and tested running plan, in my mind, I know if I stick to that, I will be able to run the marathon. And it's sort of that mindset, that took me in with the revision as well, because I just really thought, right, I've written a study guide. I'm happy with it. I've checked it with tutors or with other people. So I know if I stick to this, I'm going to probably pass the exam. And the beauty of that is that, we're all humans. And so you need to have rest as well. You can't just revise and be up until 3 a.m. the night before exam. It's not healthy. So with the revision, I sort of said to myself, right, I've got a study guide here. I'm happy with it. If I do everything on here, then I can go out of an evening and, enjoy myself. I can see people at the weekend without feeling bad, because I think remembering back to my revision, you've only sort of got two thoughts, really. You're either revising and not that happy about it, or you're not revising, but you feel bad that you should be revising. But I think that's important. Have a plan, stick to it, and know that if you stick to it, you can have your own time outside of that. So that was, sort of one of the things. There's lots of other things. Sometimes it just is not happening for you. There's a famous marathon runner that says, every time he goes out training, he goes out for 10 minutes, and if it's happening, he carries on, and if it's not happening, he stops. I'm probably not saying stopping with your revision, but just know some days it doesn't happen. Some days it is more of a struggle, and that's going to happen, and that's absolutely fine. So yeah, it's all of these things. Again, just sort of the last thing was with this sort of idea of everything outside of your control and what's in your control. I would drive to the exam centre at the same time that I was going on the day of the exam. If there was traffic, I'd leave early enough so that I could turn around and go a different way. I knew where I was going to park, all of this sort of things. And same with the marathon running. I would train at the same time that the marathon started. And then when things happen, like I would be running and my knee would start to hurt, and then after sort of 15 minutes, it would be okay. So I knew that. So in the marathon, if my knee started hurting, I didn't even think about it, because I'd put myself in that position. So similarly with the revising, if I do an exam question to time, and sometimes, I was in the days where you had to write, but, my wrists would start hurting. And so I knew that I'd just sort of do this for, 30 seconds or so, and it would be fine. Whereas if I hadn't practiced that, I might have been in the exam, my wrists might have started hurting, and I'd start panicking. What am I going to do? Am I going to be able to carry on? So that was the sort of the whole idea. And that's, as I say, where the sort of similarities that I found came into effect.
Yeah, I really like that, because you're basically simulating the environment before you go into the real thing. And we always say this to ACCA students, it's the practice ahead of the time, using the practice platform or whatever it is, mock exams. It's just the best way to get yourself familiar. And like you say, control the things that you can, knowing that when you go into the exam, you're as prepared as you can be. And I really like that. Running at the time the marathon would start, we all, that's a good tip maybe for students who maybe tried studying and practicing at the time that you are going to sit an exam or so. You've kind of touched upon some of this, but I'm guessing that you learned a lot about self-discipline and the importance of planning when you were training for the marathon. And what kept you going? What kept you sticking to your plan? What was your main motivation?
Well, I suppose with the marathon, that was quite easy because I'd been sponsored. And so, I'd collected the money, set up a Just Giving site, which is a charity website. So from that point of view, I knew I was doing it. I had to collect the money, and so that was sort of quite an easy one. And I think with ACCA, sort of similar. You have to sort of remember why you're doing this. What's the objective? And I think for most people, let's not sort of beat around the bush on it. It's to be able to have a good career and to be able to sustain, a certain level of salary. So, there are going to be tough times, as I mentioned, when you're revising. And just have to keep that in mind, really. What's the end goal and what is my objective? And it's important to sort of remember that every now and again, because sometimes you do sort of lose focus on the objective.
Yeah, keep that goal in mind all the time. So, as a runner myself, I haven't done anything quite as grueling as the London Marathon, but I know how much the positive mindset and that perseverance is key to progression. And that absolutely overlaps with the experience of studying and sitting exams. So what would you say when thinking back to your studies, what your main challenge was and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I think probably with studies, the hardest thing is studying and working at the same time, because, that sort of takes real motivation. So again, it may be because of my ADHD, but I like to get into a routine, same all the time. And with my marathon training, every Tuesday, every Thursday, and every Sunday, that was it. And so I think, as I say, the biggest challenge with the revising was coming home from work, getting home, 6:37. I would always just come in, have a quick sandwich, get in my car, and then I drove to my nearest university library, which I was able to sign in as a guest, and I would just sort of sit there until sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock in the lead up to the exams. And then I would always take off my 2 weeks holiday, which 2 weeks before the exam, and just go to the library every day, exam questions. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is as I say, is that motivation of getting into a routine, sticking to it, but certainly working and doing it at the same time, I think is the big challenge. But again, that's why you have to keep in mind, what is my motivation, what's the end goal, and just focus on that.
Keep on reminding yourself of the end goal. You will get there.
Yes.
So considering everything that we've discussed and the experiences that you've had since qualifying, if you were to go back and talk to your past self, or if you had the chance to do something differently in your studies, what would it be?
It's a difficult one because, the objective was achieved. The objective was become an ACCA member. I became an ACCA member. So would I change anything? Not sure. But I suppose if I had to, I would probably just try and link what I was doing in my studies to what I was doing at work a little bit more. Maybe sort of, if I was doing a tax exam, for example, ask if I could get involved in some of the tax work, because I think that would have made things slightly easier in terms of understanding. So that's probably something that I would have done a bit differently. I think some of the time I was so focused on, pass the exam, that I focused on how to answer a question and not always understanding the sort of the why the answer was happening. It was just sort of quite robotic. So yeah, so I'd probably say if anything, it would be that.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good. I like that answer. Because we always kind of encourage students to think about real life scenarios and how you can apply knowledge to those, because I think it does help you put things into context in real life. So before we wrap up, you've talked to your past self.
Yes.
What would you now say to students who are still on their journey to membership? What advice would you like to share before we end?
Well, I always give the same advice to anyone that is studying, and it is always that it's worth it. You know, it's hard sort of struggle on the way sometimes, but I always say, you know, if it was easy, then everyone would do it, and everyone would be a qualified accountant. So, yeah, you know, they can't take it away from you. Just sort of have that in mind. You know, once you've got that ACCA, those letters after your name, and you're a qualified accountant. Obviously, as long as you keep up your CPD and don't do anything too wrong within the eyes of ACCA, but let's assume that the people listening to this won't. Yeah, you know, you'll have it forever. They can't take it away from you, and I think that's probably the sort of the key to that. There's you know, there was a saying when I was revising and doing the marathon from a marathon runner, and it said something like, you know, there'll be months or years of wondering if you can do it, but there'll be a lifetime of knowing that you can and you have. So that's where I am at the moment. And if I may, I brought in just to sort of show that my marathon medal, and this is the same as my ACCA certificate. I have it. Nobody can take it away from me, and that would definitely be the message that I would give.
Excellent. I'm so glad you brought that in. It's good to see it. So thank you so much for your insights today and sharing your experiences with me, Jeremy. It's really good always to hear from people who have been through the membership, but I really enjoyed talking about it from this particular angle because, like you've pointed out, there are some really interesting overlaps there. So Jeremy has written an article on this same topic, and I really recommend reading that if you want to find out more, and we'll provide a link in the episode description for you. For now, though, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast, and we'll see you next time.